Hello and welcome to listening to the noise of national libraries around the world, a dialogue between our own beloved National Library of Israel and leading national libraries around the world. I want to thank the reading room team in the cultural department of the National Library who have put together such an incredible series of online events over recent months. I want to thank Karen Settel, the program director for Europe, who has been so helpful in facilitating this particular event. And I want to thank Darren, who you've just been hearing, who'll be collecting and collating some comments and questions on chat that I hope we'll get to a little bit later in the evening. And to start this dialogue, it's wonderful to be welcoming alongside our own Oren Weinberg, the director of the National Library of Israel, Roly Keating, who is the director of the British Library. And before we start talking about libraries, maybe we should start with a word about librarians, because it seems to me that we have two paths to librarianship represented in front of us. Oren, I have a sense that you very early on had an inclination to become a librarian. Your academic studies were in librarian and information studies. For many years, you were the director of the Haifa University Library. And since 2010, you have been steering the National Library of Israel through its most dramatic period, perhaps in its history. Roly, I have a sense that your path was a little bit different, and it maybe was a process of elimination. You decided to become a librarian after you'd pretty much done every other cultural, creative, administrative job that was available. In the BBC, you had an extraordinary career in which you were at various times the controller of BBC 4, BBC 2, BBC 1. You were the controller of arts commissioning, you were the director of archive content. And in that journey, you were responsible for an amazing number of flagship creative programs. So I wonder if by way of introduction, I can ask each of you to think of a moment or an experience or perhaps a person that was significant for you in your choice of the path of librarianship. Roly, maybe I'll begin with you.
Gosh, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay, first of all, across the globe via Zoom? Wonderful. Thank you, Daniel. It's careers are funny things because you always rationalize them in retrospect, but I can truthfully say that 15 years ago, I could never have dreamed I would be doing this job now. And I feel concerned when you use the word librarian. I don't have the librarian training, and we have a very distinguished colleague, Liz Jolly, who is designated our chief librarian. So to be clear, I'm the chief executive of the BL, and very proud to be so since 2012. And the journey there, yes, in retrospect, of course, I was a bookish kid, and books, literature, art have dominated my life. And when I was at the BBC, thank you for that description. People need to know I was there for nearly 30 years in another great institution with the word British in the title. I would very, very frequently be involved in television programs about literature. But I think perhaps if I had to distill how I came to make this change in my life, it's probably a little bit of a lesson of the digital age, first of all, during my time, and a measure of how much libraries are changing in front of our eyes, which is that in latter years of my time at the BBC, we were becoming very online, very digital. We were thinking hard about what does this all this technology mean? And we were creating things like BBC iPlayer, a streaming platform. And I got to know other great institutions at that time who were also exploring these questions. And I guess if I had to name one individual, it would be my predecessor, Lynn Brindley, who was then chief exec at the British Library. And the way she spoke about culture and ideas and digital and audiences utterly chimed with me and the work we were doing at the BBC. And the little bit of a revelation was that perhaps we were all in some ways in the business of sharing culture, sharing stories, promoting education, so that when in 2012, the moment came when Lynn retired and I had I think a text message saying, might I be interested in a shift of career? at that moment, instead of feeling crazy, it felt inspiring and even perhaps natural, and I'm thrilled that I did. So I think I'm going to, if I'm being an individual, it will be Lynn.
Wonderful. I hope she's online listening and getting some credit out of this. Oren, is there something that you could put your finger on as a critical moment or a critical experience?
First of all, good evening, and thank you very much, Daniel and Roly, joining us tonight, and everybody else. I see that many countries are represented here. I would say that, first of all, personal roots is that my mother is a librarian, but I never dreamt, I think, that to be a librarian until I came to study at the university and started working as a student shelving books. So I think that was the starting point. But I would say that if I have to mention one or two persons that influenced me are those that were the director and the vice director of the Haifa University Library at that time. Professor Shmuel Sever was the director, and Professor Elchanan Adler was his deputy. And both of them brought to the university or to the library the spirit of American librarianship, which those that are studying libraries knows that there is quite a big difference between European tradition and American tradition in terms of library. The open or democratization of knowledge in the States, and having a great network of public libraries and great institutions that involve both private and public initiatives there, influence both of them, and they built the library at Haifa University as a very open and centric library to the university, with open shelves that allows browsing on all those knowledge or treasures that were there and are there. And I think that their concept of a library that is open, transparent, influencing everybody had a great influence on me in the ideas that I think that I follow today at the National Library.
Wonderful. Oren, just for our next question, there have been a couple of requests if you could come a little bit closer to the microphone because it's not picking you up.
Sure. I hope
so clearly. That's
is
wonderful.
it better? Okay.
I think that is. Thank you. What's so interesting about both of you actually is that, in a sense, your experiences that led you to become library were part of what's changing in the library world, whether it's the digital iPlayer era, or whether it's this new concept that I hope we'll get a chance to speak to in a little bit about the more open libraries and so on. But before we do that, perhaps before we look forward, maybe we should just look backwards a little bit. Both of you are really entrusted with extremely important, awesome institutions, but more challenging than that is their beloved institutions. And to deal with a beloved institution is sometimes even more delicate. And one of the things, although they're very different, that both share in common, it strikes me, is both have a short history, a relatively short history in their current form, but in another sense, they go back a very long way. They have a longer history. In the case of the British Library, it's a history that's entwined, with British imperial colonialist history and some extraordinary collections. In the case of the National Library of Israel, it's very much entwined with early modern Zionism, with the dream of Israel being the center of Jewish culture, with people like Yosef Chazanovich, this totally wonderful doctor who, instead of taking money for his treatments in Europe, would ask people to pay him with books so he could send them to Jews in Ottoman Palestine to start a library there and so on. So the question I have for you is in what ways does this history inform the library's identity and the way that you see the library's mission? Again, maybe Roly, if we could start with you.
Daniel, it's a really good question and a very live question for us. For the British Library, part of, I often say, we're young and old all at the same time, and you're absolutely right. But actually, the relative youth is a massively powerful and dynamic force for us. And it does condition very much, I think, what the institution is. I mean, for those listening who may not know and feel looking into the UK, here's this country that has been building its institutions for centuries. The British Library was actually founded by an Act of Parliament in 1972. It got going the following year. So for those who like pop music, I think Slade were #1 the day the British Library started with Come On Feel the Noise. So that helps to kind of locate it in cultural history. And we did not open our London doors, and I should stress we're not just a London institution, but our London building didn't open its doors until 1998, which is the year, of course, that Google was founded, and Google are now London. So the BL is really a creation of post-war Britain at a point when it was building fresh institutions. We didn't have a national theatre, we didn't have an arts council, we were building a welfare state, and we did not have a national library in the service of a nation rebuilding itself, which is very much what the BL was founded to be. And yes, of course, it inherited in the 1970s a great portion of the museum library, which had indeed existed in some form since the founding of the British Museum, and itself owed its origins to distinguished collectors such as Cotton and Harley and so on. And so their collections, of course, gave it manuscript roots right back to the Anglo-Saxon era. And so that bit goes deep, deep down the centuries. But that was combined with scientific libraries, with libraries that had a very democratic character, with libraries devoted to data and technology. And it was very much a vision of putting knowledge to work, to be productive, and where it was ancient heritage, also that to create new knowledge. And that to this day gives us, I think, a dynamism and a vitality, which we're still learning about. And we often say we're not yet 50 years old, we're younger than I am. And it means that actually, although we value and love that precious heritage you talked about, we endeavor to not allow it to, if you like, weigh us down, because there's so much to be done.
Well, what a wonderful phrase, putting knowledge to work. I mean, it's a very inspiring mission. Oren, when you think about the very unique history of the National Library of Israel, how does that inform, the identity of the library today and the way that you see it as its mission?
Well, I think that first of all, there are quite a few similarities between the NLI and the BL. In the fact that Israel, as a very modern state, didn't have a national library, and a real national library, until 2007, because for most of its years, since its foundation in 1892, and the formation of the Hebrew University, that then the library joined to the university and became a university library, and its national role was not the strongest role in those two parts. It was mainly a research library of the university, and it took many years until 2007, when the Knesset, the Israel Parliament, has passed the National Library law. So if the BL was part of a museum, and the National Library was part of university, and I think only in the last few decades, the understanding of the importance of a real nation library to the state, to the economic, to the culture, has put the library in its right place. We always joke that when a country is formed, they're building a few institutions first: a jail, a stadium, and a library. So in Israel, it took a few years until we got the library. But the fact is that the work of collecting for those many years, since 1892, and building great collection of Jewish and Israeli heritage has really stepped down very fast in pace when the digital age came. And I think that if we look on the history, on what we collected for 100 years or 200 years, and look at the quantities that we now have to collect and have to absorb into the collection, this is a huge change, and also the understanding of what it can do of having those digital collection in a library. So we worked on a very slow pace for 100 years, and now we have to speed up in a rate or a pace that we never experienced and dreamt upon. So this is the real, we are now in a real crucial moment of not only how to collect, but also how to give access to all this information.
Thank you. I hope we'll get a chance to discuss, the implications of the digital world in a little bit, but just staying with a moment with the weight of history on your shoulders as custodians. I'm wondering, and Roly hinted at this before, history can be a scaffold. In some ways, it can also be something of a shackle. And there are things that you do need to do to break out, to enter new arenas. One I feel quite personally, when I was maybe 15 or 16, I managed to wangle, I don't know how, a ticket to the reading room of the British Library at the time. And I felt extraordinarily clever sitting there under the dome in one of those plush red chairs that they had at the time. But I also felt like I'd bluffed my way into enemy camp somehow, because it was absolutely clear that this was not a place where young people were supposed to be. And the same thing I have to say, Oren, the first time I visited the National Library in Israel, it was not a place that encouraged children. I think it was even forbidden for a kid under the age of 16 to go there at the time. And yet there's been something quite remarkable that's happened over a very short period of time, which is the demographic, the customer base of the libraries has changed so dramatically. If you can just talk a little bit, maybe Oren, you speak first, just talk a little bit about who are the new populations that you're trying to reach out to, and how are you welcoming them into the library community?
Well, I think that becoming a true national library that is, its ideology is to bring knowledge to life and to reach and enrich various audiences and a much wider audience than just the research community, without leaving them aside, but keeping investing in them, is to bring everybody to the library, from school children, from ultra-Orthodox to secular, from young and old, and from academics and non-academics, and to build a dialogue between those audiences. This is so important for us that we invest in a new building, so it can be a hub for all those people coming together and getting out of the university campus to a much more open and transparent and visible place. And I'm sure that we'll talk about it later, but the idea is that instead of closing the knowledge inside the fences or the walls of the library, we should open them and bring them to life and allow as much access and usage for those collections. So the demographic is changing. They are younger. They are coming from various audiences. And not forget that we have also many users coming on the virtual or the digital side. And they should also have
we'll come to virtual, but Oren, just share with us some numbers, maybe the year before COVID. How many young people did you have visiting the library?
Well, we have tens of thousands school children coming each year in groups to study at the library. And I think more important is even the outreach that we can do with the work with the Ministry of Education to go to the classes where they are. As we are center in Jerusalem, we want to go and be in the classroom itself through all the digital collection that we have and all the special programs that we have.
Well, thank you. And Roly, I know this has been a priority for you too, actually, to break down invisible walls. You have programs to reach minority voices and so on. If you can share with us a little bit about how you're thinking about broadening the reach and who you're trying to reach.
Yes, I mean, I think the British Library, I think, undoubtedly is evolving and has evolved over the decades. It was probably primarily conceived in its research library identity originally with a particular focus on academia, and that's very, very important to us. We're not a university library, but we're, if you like, a people's university library. We try and give absolutely everyone that quality of service. And Oren, you used the phrase bringing knowledge to life. You know, we tend to use the phrase living knowledge. It's very interesting to hear how closely these ideas chime. When we rewrote our mission a few years ago, we talked about making our intellectual heritage accessible to everyone for research, inspiration, and enjoyment. And there were two words I remember debating at the board. Enjoyment is one of them, which actually one of our board members suggested, and it's spot on, absolutely right. And our most dedicated researchers are enjoying themselves. But also, of course, that word everyone. It's not just that we're funded by general taxation. In that sense, we're an institution for everyone. But there is a universality to what any national library holds, which means that the giving back in equity needs to be to everyone as well. Everyone's lives, everyone's stories, everyone's tradition is in there, and we need to find ways to do that. Having said that, in terms though of breadth and demographics and so on, I think I came to maybe the British Library in its St Pancras building 8 years ago, thinking that the look and feel of it may be a caricature of an audience you might expect, but not at all. Even then, and perhaps even more so, I hesitate to say now because of COVID, which, and thank you for it. It was 20 minutes before the C word came into this meeting, but these days when the pandemic is not on, the public spaces of the library are humming with people of all ages, all backgrounds. And I think it's quite a subtle journey because the reading rooms, you described your experience being you must have been a very, very clever 15-year-old because you were meant to be 18, I think, Daniel, to get in. You're clearly extremely persuasive. So even to this day, the official reading rooms, you're meant to be an 18-year-old. So the British Library has never been, if you like, a children's library. But the hunger for young people to come into our premises, to study in our spaces informally, to come to our educational events, which have blossomed in the last 10 years, is growing and growing and growing. So I would say now we're on a bit of an unbreakable journey to find new audiences all the time. And increasingly, and we might come back to this, what we're trying to do is break out of our buildings in London and in Yorkshire, which is the other base for the library in the UK, and to work with our friends in the public library sector so that great exhibitions can be shared all around the UK.
Before we break out of the buildings, let's just say a word about the buildings themselves. First of all, anybody that has traveled, around Jerusalem and will have seen something remarkable, which is this breathtaking building arising between the Knesset and the Israel Museum. That's the new National Library of Israel. And thinking about the buildings, and I know, Roly, you basically inherited a new building for the British Library that was constructed not so long before you took up your role. So obviously we'll talk about digital, but the question is, in a world where there's such digital access and everything is on the cloud, what is the added value of these buildings? And how do you navigate all the different missions of these buildings, in a single edifice? Oren, I'll ask you first. I mean, the fact is, within the National Library in Israel, sometimes people talk about a tension between the library and the Bet Midrash, the Jewish study hall, because the library is so hushed and reverent and the study hall is so noisy. How in a single building do you seek to fulfill all these functions?
Well, first of all, I must say that one big inspiration for the library team and its board in 2010, we came to the British Library for, let's say, a week of learning from various aspects of the library. And I remember that everybody was so impressed, including myself, of course, from the, let's say, the buzz of the BL. The fact that everything was so full, wherever you throw a coin, you find somebody sitting, and not in the reading rooms necessarily, but outside. So it was a great experience for us to see that the library could be full in a digital age. First of all, that people look at the library as a destination, as a place that they can meet people, a place that is without many walls or without many rules. Of course, we like to have rules in the library, in the reading rooms, but the fact is that people can meet and speak, meet and speak and have a dialogue and a discourse on the collection with the wisdom of the librarian, with the dialogue between, let's say, serious research and a lay person that in talking and meet at the cafeteria. And I think that we came to the design of the new building, and I would brag a little bit, and I'll share just an image or so on the new building. When we came to design the building or think about the programmatic needs of the library, and we were very fortunate to have great architects, Herzog de Meuron from Basel, we wanted a very transparent building, very open, without any walls, that will bring people in, and the people that goes through the street around the building can understand what happens there and really attract inside, not only because the books on the shelves, but because of the people. And we want to turn the building into a real cultural center that allows people to recreate on the basis of the collection, recreate in terms of their research needs, or recreate in terms of a theater show, or a dance, or a concert, or inspiration on writing a new book or a journal article. So the building is not a purpose, it's a tool for us to be a hub in Jerusalem, a very active hub of people coming in and talk to each other. And it's so needed in Israel and in the Jewish world that people can speak to each other and have a discussion, especially today. So this is the roots of the building, and you can see how this comes in this new architecture piece in Jerusalem, in the center of Jerusalem.
Thank you so much. And just to echo what Oren said, if you are ever losing hope in Israeli society and the hope of sort of social cohesion, one of the cures is to go to the reading room or the internet terminals in the National Library and to see every part of Israeli society, Hasidim sitting next to students from East Jerusalem and so on and so forth. And it really does give you hope. And in a sense, you know, just like the books that disagree with each other can sit side by side on the shelf, to see the members of the different tribes sitting next to each other is very moving indeed. Roly, share us a little bit about the physical premises of the library and how that helps you in your mission of putting knowledge to work.
No, thank you. Yeah, and I think like people on the chat line, by the way, I'm constantly blown away by how beautiful the new National Library of Israel is going to be. I can't wait to see it. I mean, when I took on this role, there were some who would say to me how sad it was that we still felt we needed a building, because obviously now everything was in the cloud and it was all coming to an end. And I can only say, as Oren said about that buzz, and thank you, Oren. Yes, I mean, still, the library more than ever can have that buzz. We have found a glorious paradox in the digital age that the more of our collection we digitize and online, the larger the crowds of people queuing up to get into the building seem to be of every generation. And I think it is something to do with, partly, of course, digital is a great way of marketing things. It lets people know. It can inform people very simply of the existence of these collections and these places. But also, I think there are lessons that we knew we were learning in this digital age, which frankly, the experience of the last year has only brought to life. It is lovely to be speaking to you through a glass screen, but nothing can compare to the power of real human interaction in a physical space, the sheer energy you get from others. So I think for generations who increasingly get their most basic knowledge experience through a screen, there's an ever greater premium on coming to serious public spaces engineered for concentration, where actually you are allowed to think, you're given time to think, you see others doing that. There's people engaging in private study in a public space. And I think that's precious in the digital age and deeply understood by our users. And so I think actually when the pandemic ends and as we move to this next generation, I think we're going to see the crowds returning more than ever because of that hunger for other human beings, and actually sometimes for just the wonder of the physical object, which you just cannot quite replicate through the screen. And you asked, how do we navigate the different missions? Well, like Oren, I think you engineer that into the architecture, you keep the silent spaces silent, the noisy places noises, the in-between places in between, and you create the environment, though, where people can also be a bit serendipitous and bump into each other, because you don't want segregation either.
That's so interesting that the more things are available digitally, the more people want to see them in the flesh, as it were. It's almost like the collections, the books, the artifacts become celebs. You know, the more movies they've been in, the more people want to wait outside the stage door and get the autograph. You know, in that sense, you know, is this the same thing that I've already become familiar with through the screen? I do want to pick you up on the last point. I mean, today it's, in a sense, it's so rare that there are quiet, respectful, dignified places that you don't need to pay to go into. And I was very, very moved. There's a marvelous book called Poverty Safari by Darren Mccarthy that you might have read. He grew up in tremendous poverty in one of the slums of Glasgow. And he describes libraries as having been enormously important in his own personal education. Because he says, if you grow up in that background, you know, people don't realize there are very few places that you can go where there's no noise. And certainly none that you don't have to pay for. I wonder if you think about social mobility, about bettering yourself, having that opportunity to feel differently about yourself as being part of the mission of the library. Oren?
Well, it's a great question. I think it also goes back to the root of what is a public library, and not only a national library. A public library that is really open and has no barriers, and people can come in even if they are living in the streets, and they can have the ability to connect to somebody with a Wi-Fi and a computer, or read a book, or read a daily newspaper. And I think this is actually one of the greatest role of libraries. Wherever they are open. They don't get, you don't need tickets. You might stand in a line if it's a very popular library, but it is encouraging to see people that come in and feel at home. And I think that one of the things that National Library are not good at in terms of the architecture of them, and I hope that we're not making a mistake is that libraries can be intimidating to those that have no ability to have a book or to read at home. And we should always try to make people, whatever audience it is, feel at home at a library. So they can sit in a comfort chair, and they can have a coffee, and sometimes even put their legs on above the table and feel really at home and go to sleep while they read a book. And I think in many libraries that are good libraries, you can see people that fallen asleep while they read a book. And that means they feel at home.
So you heard it here from the director of the National Library of Israel. You are allowed to put your feet on the table in the National Library as the headline news. But more to the point, I think what you were saying, Oren, is reflected also in the incredible architecture, particularly in that part of Jerusalem where so many buildings are closed in. This is a truly open, welcoming building, you know, surrounded by gardens that literally invite you know, people to come off the sidewalk and enter into the library. Roly, thoughts about libraries as places where people can better themselves, you know, tools for social mobility?
I think they are possibly the most fundamental of those civic institution types in that respect, because if there is to be equality of opportunity in life, and people are going, whatever their background, going to be able to open up new vistas for themselves or discover something in their imagination that only they have, then not just free access to heritage and information, but supported, trusting, non-judgmental, free, not marketized or commercialized access is such a precious thing. It's not that old as a democratic principle. You know, it's been going maybe 150 years in different forms. And national libraries, I think, are increasingly becoming part of that mission, which is characteristically one of the local and public libraries. And we're very proud to do so. And I think that's part of the reason we work with them. And actually, there was another colleague of mine, actually, in my previous career. Maybe I won't be too specific to over-identify, but I probably will. But and it maybe was when I was weighing up this choice, and this person said to me that their childhood, and they were in America at the time, growing up, and they literally said that of their friendship cohort growing up, 90% of them now were in jail or had been killed because of the gang culture. But this colleague had found the library and found that literally a safe space. We talk about libraries, public libraries as safe spaces, but this was literally a safe space. And this person was now a great leader in media and so on. But so that really taught me a very human lesson, that when we talk about not just the principles of libraries, but their physical role in communities, it's not just an intellectual or nice to have aspect of society. It's something pretty fundamental. So no, I think, you know, national libraries, we can only be a little part of that in some ways, and we have other tasks to do. But at a conceptual level, I believe in it very, very strongly indeed.
Wow. Before I ask my next question, I just want to remind people that if you have questions that you'd like to ask Roly and Oren, now is the time to write them into the chat, and we'll try and get to as many of those as possible. Roly, you thanked me for not mentioning it, but I can't hold back. I do have to mention the C word. But rather than focusing on the way in which both of these libraries have adapted and the agility that you've shown in relation to the Corona period, and here I just invite people to visit your website to see an absolutely remarkable range of lectures, debates, exhibitions, and so on. But I'd like to ask, in what ways what we're seeing now is a window into the future of libraries? You know, I think in quite a lot of areas, Corona has basically speeded up existing tendencies. It sort of played into megatrends in quite a dramatic way. And it could be that this period gives us a little glimpse of what the future of libraries might look like, and particularly now we're talking about the digital aspects. Oren, can you share with us some thoughts on that?
Well, I think that what we learned, and maybe the biggest lesson, is that we should...
Oren, just again, can I ask you to speak up a little?
Sorry, forgot that. So I think that what we learned from the COVID period is that, and we're still learning, unfortunately, that we should push much more faster and harder to put everything we can online. And when I mean everything, is not only the collection, it's also the spirit of the library, its culture, its activities. And I would mention maybe one or two things that we did during the pandemic. And this tonight is a great example for that. We in the library have maybe 30,000 people participating in cultural events yearly in the current building, because we simply don't have the space and the ability to bring more. Since the pandemic, we had opened this reading room, virtual reading room, that we had more than 150 events, and we already passed the 150,000 participants in making knowledge alive and used with various activities in the reading room, from music to talks like this. And the ability to do that and reach people from all over the world and all over Israel is really a wonderful experience for us. The fact that we can engage with so many people around the world. And maybe a smaller example is something that we do each summer when we do what we call the summer camp from Arab children from East Jerusalem in the library, that we bring them for 2 weeks in the library for having various activities around the collection. Unfortunately, we couldn't do that in the last summer, but we opened a digital summer camp for them, and we had instead of having 20 to 30 people, students coming to the library, we had more than 500 participants in this digital camp from all over Israel, and even one from Damascus. So it was an amazing experience for us to have this ability to open walls, open boundaries, and reach so many people.
If you're talking about that, Oren, maybe it's also just mentioning, because I think people aren't aware of it, of the extraordinary Islamic Arabic connection in J Riot, which I know is the Arabic news collection, which gets hits from Saudi Arabia and all sorts of other places in the region. Just share a little, if you can, about how far your digital reach goes.
So we have two big digitization projects of newspaper. One is the Historical Jewish Press project, and it is a collaboration between DNLI and Tel Aviv University. Right now we have more than 3 million pages from Jewish press around the world, and we continue digitization efforts all over the world to having everything open and accessible. And the second project is Jaride, as you said. It's Arabic for press, that we digitize something like 200,000 pages from a newspaper in Arabic from the Ottoman and Demanded period, which see great usage from all over the world, and especially from outside of Israel, from many Arab countries. Simply, there is no other resource that is open and available like that.
Right. Thank you. Roly, same question.
Same question. Yes, I mean, I think it touches on themes we were talking about before. I think we often use the word these days, the hybrid library, the physical and the digital together. And by the brutal temporary taking away of the physical, I think both librarians and their staff and their users have actually discovered whole new ways of particularly the kind of events that Oren was talking about. And exactly as Oren says, we've discovered that events that might have reached a packed house of 240 people in the library can reach 2,000 or 3,000 instantly or more. And so I suppose this is where I'm, drawing a little bit on my previous professional experience. You can see cultural institutions learning in the best way to be broadcasters in the digital age. And so they should, because they have wonderful stories to tell, great storytellers, great objects, and they are a great civic space for dialogue in the digital space. And I hope that's a legacy of this year that doesn't go away, but it gets combined when we repopulate the buildings with actually using the buildings again themselves in fresh ways, but finding ways to share those, as Oren says, globally and digitally. Just maybe one other, so much to reflect on here, but one other theme from this past year, which we probably share with other companies or organizations, but I think it's changed probably to some degree forever, the way we manage our working lives and another kind of hybrid existence. And at the moment, everyone is working from home far too much. I'm here in my sitting room at the moment. But actually getting a better, neater balance where you can between the different parts of life, and also communicating better within an organization. I think maybe as a leader, I took it as read that because I was in the building, I was somehow visible, and of course I wasn't. Whereas an experience like this, using tools like this, paradoxically really does allow you to get closer to the people you're working with. And I hope that doesn't go away either.
I wonder, while we're on the digital space, I want to ask you a related question, which is, part of the job of a library is to capture a snapshot of society. And gone are the days where simply collecting the books or the printed material was sufficient to do that. So now there is an absolutely enormous challenge about what does it actually mean to collect a picture of what society is like. There is so much that is out there. First of all, even physical objects that are not printed matter. And I know the National Library in Israel has a really interesting project in relation to ephemera, these very revealing items. But beyond that, in the digital space, when you think about constantly changing websites, Facebook, Twitter, and so on, that people are going to want to know about, how do you think about capturing that for future generations? Oren.
I think that we're only scratching the ground on that, and we have so many questions without many answers to them. The fact that many libraries and organizations now archive the internet, collect or take a snapshot of different moments in the domain of the countries, but access to that is still a huge problem. Having so many terabytes or petabytes of information without a good mechanism to go and look at the website, the historical website and the information there. And it's a huge challenge, and I don't think that we have many good answers to that. And even a biggest challenge because of privacy and contractual reasons, the fact that we cannot collect in a good quality or a good way what happens in the social networks. For example, we used to collect or document everything concerned with every election in Israel, and you know that we have many of those, and we enjoy having many of those. But the fact is that the last campaigns were managed mostly on Facebook, Twitter, and other, and now TikTok. How you collect them if you don't have the agreement with the platform to collect them? Who owns the data? How you can make it accessible later? Do you have to ask permission from each person that now influence in its Twitter account to get this data and collect it and make it available? So many challenges there, and I think that we are still really scratching the ground on making good answers for our users today and in the future.
I just want to pay tribute to how diligent the library is in following up on chasing up some of this material. One of my sons was asked to be the editor of his high school newsletter, and he got an angry letter from the National Library saying that they hadn't submitted the last 2 or 3 editions for storage in the archives, and they were so proud to get this letter from the National letter so that they could show everybody. Roly, thinking about how you capture a snapshot.
Yes, I mean, I agree with everything Oren said. It's very partial. It is just a snapshot. I mean, for those who are not aware, it is worth stressing that ancient tradition or old tradition of legal deposit, which most national libraries are involved in, the compulsory delivery of published material, is now a digital law in most countries as well. We've been active in this space for 7 or 8 years, and on a voluntary basis before that. So we do each year, as well as every ebook and e-journal, we do ingest a pretty comprehensive trawl of at least most of the British web domain, the portion of the World Wide Web. And although that doesn't address the social media question, it does mean that any blog, if anyone's published a blog in the UK, we've collected that, we've preserved it, it'll still be, we hope, accessible in 300 years' time. And because that does contain news media and other commentary, it allows us on occasion to dive deeper. So during the COVID crisis, we've been collaborating with other collecting institutions to make sure we're doing a deep dive as much as we can into digital content around the crisis, working with the health service and elsewhere, and enhancing that with oral history and other kinds of material where we can enrich the record, as well as the kind of ephemera you were talking about. So it does, though, leave the elephant still standing in the room, which is the huge swathe of the social media companies, which are certainly not legally captured under the legislation of most nations. They're registered in America or China and so on. and they are technically very, very hard as well as contractually to engage with. And they would also present massive archival challenges anyway, because they're not singular publications. Everyone's experience of social media is different. So like Oren, I'm going to list the challenges in that area rather than have an easy
so
answer.
let me ask you a follow-up question, if I could, Roly, and I'd like to hear Oren on this as well. When you have this vast quantity of information, I'm not even talking about the information that you can't get to, but simply the information that you can. How do you make it not just accessible, but manageable for your users, for your readers? And here, I suppose the question is, to what extent are you simply providing access, and to what extent are you curating, are you shaping the material so that it becomes more digestible for users? And obviously, if you do start shaping it, that creates all sorts of dilemmas in itself. What is the subtext? What's the message that you're conveying? How do you manage that dilemma?
No, that's a great question. It's a pre-digital question, actually. I mean, in some ways, because as national libraries with heritage collections, we have curatorship in one very traditional sense of experts in the historic material who add to knowledge and literally care for those collections. And then to a lesser extent than museums, but a bit like museums, we will curate exhibitions, but that's very transparent. We're creating a narrative and so on, and that's selective. But of course, the fundamental distinctive role of a national research collection is to not do that, but simply to allow you to come in and create whatever, and help you, but to help you find whatever journey of discovery you want to go on. So job number one is to get better and better at those search tools, those discovery tools. And of course, they do exist, and we all make use of the commercial search engines, which are themselves evidence of how you can algorithmically find a way through. But of course, then you get into debates over the transparency of the software that allows you to do that. So within that, undoubtedly, there are elements of selection and curation in making material available. And to some extent, the work we're doing on COVID at the moment is like that. We're making a selection of material in real time. But as long as you do it openly, I think it's fine, and scholars and researchers can see what you're doing.
Well, Oren, this dilemma between making information accessible and making it sort of user-friendly and manageable, how do you think about it?
I would add to another layer to what Roly said, is that more and more you need to tell stories about your collection and items, and not just put the item itself. And I see that Ilana Tan is here. She's the curator of the Hebrew collection at the BL, and she is doing a marvelous job in her blogs and work in social media in telling interesting stories about the collection. And we have a dedicated team, media team on to tell interesting stories in blogging, in Facebook, in Twitter, to encourage people to know what we have and to make a good use of them. So I think this is a new layer for us, the ability to tell stories to a wide audience and to attract them to know what we have and to understand them better, because sometimes the story behind an item is even more interesting than the item itself.
Well, so now's the time for me to mention some of the questions that have been coming in on the chat. Steve asks about censorship, and in particular, his question is: Have you or your libraries come under pressure to make or not make certain things available, to censor things, to restrict them? How do you handle these kind of things? Takers, Roly, maybe you start us off.
I mean, basically, no. I mean, that's really one of the fundamentals of a collection like this, is that it precisely is the warts and all record of what got published in any given generation, however distasteful or shocking or upsetting or contentious it may be. And our task is to create, as we said, a safe space for the discovery of that. Now, clearly within that, there is material if it crosses a legal boundary and so on. And any library has provisions for either controlled access or certain forms of restriction. But censorship really, no. There are one or two bits of oral history we've collected where it was, if you like, a generous gift by someone to give an oral contribution to the library, and we've agreed that won't be made available until after their death or for a generation to come. Mm-hmm. So that will be a piece of restricted content, I guess.
And Oren, is censorship or political or other pressure a factor?
I will just add to that I think that as more as we become digital and exposed with either the metadata that we create or the items themselves, we'll see more demands on asking us to put things away. While nobody noticed them when they were on the shelf, when they are now in Google, people will react and will say that this is not, let's say they want to dismiss it, it's not appropriate, or any other reason. And we already see those requests coming in.
So we have, Rochelle has asked a question. I mean, she's asked a question, how can one provide accurate information about Israel and Jews for other sites? But I think maybe we can broaden that to a question about, do libraries have a particular role or a responsibility in an era of fake news? Do they simply continue doing the job that they would normally do? Does an era of populism and misrepresentation give them a particular type of responsibility? Oren, any thoughts on that?
I would say that this is a traditional role of librarians, that they need to help people to understand how to evaluate information, how to understand what is important and less important, what is true and not true, but they do it with research tools and librarians' profession and knowledge, and not placing, let's say, tags on things if they are accurate or not. Assessing the information is one of the things that we can help in.
Exactly that, Daniel. It doesn't change the role of librarians. It shines an ever brighter spotlight on what that fundamental role has always been about, guiding people, helping them assess, helping them weigh up different sources of material. And I think what we're experiencing now simply shows how fundamental that professional role is, and probably needed more than ever.
And there's one more question, which I think I will, I'll ask in my own way. The other library that, you know, beyond the British Library and the National Library of Israel that I feel close to is the library in Harvard. It's not a national library, but it's a very special library. And there's an extraordinary story about the fact that the library burned down. It's burned down a number of times, but it burned down in the 1760s. And the dean of the library came into the quad, the Harvard Yard there, and was in tears that he wouldn't be able to, I mean, he thought he would have to close down the university. And then one student came up to him and said, well, no, you don't need to close down the university, because I took a single book out of the library without permission. Here it is, we can rebuild the library. And they did, of course. But the thing that I love most about this story is, having taken the book, they then expelled the student for taking the book out of the library without permission, which I thought showed that it was a genuine academic institution. But the totally unfair question, the single book, the single item that you would take, and Roly, this is much harder for you because you have so many, but the impossible question, if your desert island item from the collection, Roly, let's start with you.
Oh, that's such a cruel question, Daniel. I'm going to duck it and say it's all right. It's not a book, because discriminating between books feels cruel. But maybe in our treasures gallery, every time I see Jane Austen's little writing desk at which she sat and wrote almost all her correspondence, most of her novels, and when we display maybe her letter to her brother on that gives me a tingle that can't be replicated. So maybe I'll grab that as I'm running out the door.
That's what and that I think is a good example of the type of feeling that you probably couldn't get however many times you saw it online. It's just being in the same room and feeling so close to it. Oren.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm not playing in that game. They're all our sons. I'm not discriminating anyone.
I've been asked to show why you guys are genuine librarians.
I've been asked that question so many times and I'm still refusing.
I thought I might be able to break down your resistance. The time has literally flown past and it's been such a fascinating discussion. And also a reminder, I have to say, I stopped looking at the chats while I was listening to the conversation, but earlier on, just as people were checking in, I saw this is a conversation that includes people from Loch Lomond, from Cincinnati, from all parts of the world, and to have everybody part of this discussion. Once again, I want to thank the Reading Room team in the Cultural Department for all of their work. I want to thank Karen Settel for this and everything else that she does for Geshe Europa. I want to thank Darren for making the technical side of it look so simple. I want to invite you all, if you haven't, to really visit the virtual reading room, and two events that I think you'll find particularly interesting. First of all, the follow-up to this dialogue will be a dialogue with the director of the National Library of Australia on March the 15th. And secondly, this is fresh off the press, and many, many thanks to Roly and Oren for arranging it, and also to Ilana, who I see, Ilana Tahan, who I remember from London. We are privileged to be able to have a private virtual tour of the Hebrew Manuscripts exhibition in the British Library, which includes such treasures as the rabbinic letter advising Henry VIII on his divorce and so on and so forth. It should be very special indeed, and that will be on March the 22nd. So thank you to all of them. And now, even though this is the reading room of a library, and I invite you to unmute your cameras and express your appreciation to our dialogue participants, to Roly Keating and to Oren Weinberg. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Really interesting.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Daniel.
Thank you.
Thank you from Italy.
From Warsaw.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting.
Very interesting.
Thank
A good
you.
way to start the day. Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much.
Thank you.
Good way to end the day.
It was brightening my horizon. It was a pleasure to see that books connect all of us. Books, libraries, brighten our world, especially in this time of COVID-19.
Yeah.
Kudos to all of you.
Amen.
Yes.
Amen.
Thank
Of the book. Is it possible for you to answer the chat questions in writing somewhere?
Great speakers. Thank you. Thanks.
Daniel didn't answer his question. Daniel,
Thanks, everybody.
which book are you taking? Is he gone?
Doesn't want to commit himself.
No, Daniel. Thank you, everybody. Toda rabba.
Hi,
Margaret.
Hi, who's that? Who's saying hi?
Ilana.
Thank you all very, very much, and we'll see you in the next event.
Can those links be emailed to all the people who participated today? It's hard to copy that out of the chat. It's hard to copy those links out of the chat, especially if you're on a phone, which I am. Can all those be emailed by Darren, is that her name, to the people who are on this call?
I would rather not email everyone, but if you can reply to the email where you got the link, then I will send you specifically all the links.
What I would like to know, is instead of just sending a blank check to the National Library, do you have any particular projects that you're working on? I mean, I know I can speak to Jay Pomerantz because I know he does the children's things a lot. But is there anything else that you would be specifically interested in having more of? An amount, like, you know, $100 would do this,
I think a similar answer is warranted. If you reply to the email that you received with the link, I will put you in touch with the person who's in charge of those things.
Thank you.
Margaret, we will be in touch with you. This is Karen. Hello.
Hi, Karen. Hi, great. Okay, thank you so much.
Can you
I'd like to
answer?
do something. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Wonderful. Fabulous, exciting.
Can you answer some of the chat questions in writing through the email?
I don't know if that will be possible. I'll try and check.
I'm looking forward to future chats. It's wonderful. Fabulous. Thank you. Karen, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all of you for being such a great audience.
There are lots of people.
There is, yes. I'm just writing a correction to the date.
Okay, thank you all. We'll see you in our next events.
Thank you.
Laila
Bye,
from
Darren.
Jerusalem. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Laila from London. Bye.
Bye-bye.